Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Zachary Kilhoffer. I'm from the University of Illinois, also known as U of I, also known as UIUC. So our paper is called How Technical Do You Get? I'm an English teacher teaching and learning cybersecurity and AI ethics in high school. I can see that our authors represent me, a few others from UIUC, UC Boulder, and also University of Denver. And I would just quickly point out two authors, Firmiana, Wang, and Fahad, Tamton, are actually high school students. So I think that we tried to represent the high schoolers as well here. But before we get to the paper, I'd like to play a quick game with you. You need to spot the troll. So you can see, this is just the first part of the profile here. I'll show you a few posts. This is Amy G. You can see daughter, proud Black American, et cetera, around 13K followers, and so on. So here's the first post. Republican logic. Birth control, ban it. Abortion, ban it. Gay marriage, ban it. Guns, look, banning things never works. And then we have a couple more here. We have something that's dishing out some damage to former President Trump, and then we have a quote from Michelle Obama. So, audience choice. Do we have a troll or legit? Could I get a quick show of hands for troll? Quick show of hands for legitimate? Okay. I'm not going to tell you now. I'll tell you later. So, we'll get to it. Yeah. So, we started this research project with a few contentions. The first is that kids need AI and cybersecurity education. And the second is that AI and cybersecurity education needs ethics. And from this basis, we formed a couple of research questions. The first is, what topics do high school classes cover relating to cybersecurity and AI ethics? So sort of the what is out there. And the second is more about the how. How are these topics taught? So really, what are the teaching strategies? What are the resources that are used to cover these topics? And the third concerns the challenges. What are the remaining challenges for teaching these topics to high schoolers? So our methodology was qualitative. We conducted a total of 27 semi-structured interviews. We had teachers from 5 states and students from 4 states, as you can see here. We've got a little bit of representation, not from the West Coast, I suppose, but a little bit from the rest of the United States. And just to give you an idea of what we were really talking about within these interviews, here's a couple of example questions. So we talked to teachers and said, have you taught anything related to this or that? And then we asked, how did that go? What was the response like of students? Were they engaged? Were they just kind of distracted? Or how did that go? And we asked essentially the inverse of that to the students. Have you ever learned anything related to ethics and cybersecurity, related to AI? And how did that go? How did you react? How did the other students react? And so we similarly asked for their kind of reflections on that and what made it successful, what made it less successful, and so on. We really delved deep when we found there was a particular topic area that seemed very relevant to the paper. So for research question 1, this is the what themes are covered. These are the main categories that we found. You'll see on the left side of the slide here. So epistemic norms, this concerns what we think is true and why we think that it's true. So this concerns stuff like fake news and how do we understand the things we read online and trust it or not trust it, for example. Privacy, which is always, of course, an ethical topic in cybersecurity and AI. Digital citizenship, which is more about the way that we try to be good citizens and how we interact with one another online. Emerging technologies, you can see on the right-hand side here. This is a tool that probably a number of people in this audience, I'd assume, are familiar with here. It's a tool from MIT called the Moral Machine. And so basically, it presents you a whole bunch of different scenarios, and then you have to decide who do you allow to die in this scenario, where the autonomous car has to make a decision about where it's going to crash, right? A number of teachers told us that when it came to emerging technologies and the ethics behind technologies, autonomous vehicles were an amazing starting point because the students just get it. It seems like it's something that we're very close to. It seems that it's very immediately tangible and engaging for the high school age folks. And so this was, it's something that came up very frequently. Next was ethical hacking. Cybersecurity in the state. This concerns stuff like Stuxnet, for example, concerned things like the Russian attacks on the 2016 US election, whenever there's sort of a state party involved in the hack. And then cyber hygiene, which is essentially the behaviors that we have to try to not get phished or not have a data breach and so on and so forth. To delve a little bit more deeply into one of these topics, which is privacy, I have a couple of different thoughts here. The first is from teacher number 5, who said, "My definition of privacy is far, far different from that of my students. They basically don't have any expectations. It is not a concern." Student 11 sort of nuanced this, saying, not all high schoolers are the same. They say, "Some students won't even post their face online. Other people will on a daily or an hourly basis be posting updates about what's going on in their lives and where they are and so on." So one thing that seemed to strike out to us was a concept called learned helplessness. For many of the students who seemed to say that privacy either doesn't matter or doesn't exist or whatever, it seemed like this is maybe something that they've learned to believe. There was one student in particular, this was a quote from their teacher, but according to the teacher, the student said, with regards to privacy, they already have us. Like, what are you going to do at this point? All the big tech companies and everything, they already have us. So when students did talk about their own thoughts about privacy and what they value about privacy, they tended to focus on the visible digital footprint. Essentially, the students and teachers kind of agreed that by the time you're in high school, you know somebody who has been burned because of the stuff that they posted online or the stuff that kind of came to the surface online, right? So they do tend to be very aware of their digital footprint. And when it came to sort of privacy from whom, it seemed that the students were much more concerned about privacy from their teachers, from their parents. They were not really concerned about privacy from their government or privacy from the authorities, privacy from, tech companies, for example, the social media companies that they are making use of. So one thing we found is that librarians are often the ones who are tasked with teaching cyber hygiene. And this is basically a part of high school orientation, right? So once you become a freshman, you get your email, maybe you get your laptop or your tablet or whatever, you get your credentials that you need to start using for logging into digital resources using the school computers. And so there was one quote that really stuck out to me about a very serious incident at one school. The librarian told us, "A bunch of boys asked their girlfriends to send them nude pictures. One boy was like, 'Hey guys, let's all put these photos into Google Drive under our school account, and then we can share it.' And they did it. So then the school got in trouble for child pornography. Huge thing from teacher number 6. So in response to big incidents, you saw schools sometimes taking cyber hygiene more seriously. This particular librarian that we spoke to frequently was sort of invited into the health classes to talk about intimate relationships and the way that you can navigate these as a high schooler. So now how do you text each other? How do you integrate sort of your relationship, or how do you navigate your relationship via these digital devices and your social media and so on? Trying to sort of approach this with a non-judgmental, not a sort of a shaming or don't do this kind of approach to relationships in high school. So, I promised I'd tell you, it's a troll. I think that probably 55% of you guys got it, so it wasn't too bad. But yeah, that was a Russian troll that you saw earlier. But so, as for how it's taught, the first one that I want to talk about is discussions. So these can take any kind of form, right? But one thing we found about discussions is that it was very much related to current events. You just can't talk about current events for very long without getting into some cybersecurity incident or breach or hack or whatever, right? And also discussions came around in English language arts sorts of classes. So literature and film, and especially sci-fi, was really important to teach about ethics and empathy. One teacher told us that they show one of the first scenes from the film Minority Report. And this is the one where I think Tom Cruise sees from the precog that there's a murder about to happen, and they burst in right before the murder is going to happen. And so the teacher then tells the students, "Yeah, that seems extremely futuristic, but let's talk about real predictive policing." Then they start talking about the machine learning models that determine someone's bail, their likely recidivism, and this kind of thing, right? So it was just, the sci-fi was a very useful segue into what we actually see today. Other techniques were technical with and without coding, the content creator approach, which according to many teachers is what the students want to be doing anyway, so might as well take advantage of that. The hands-off approach, which is where you basically give the students a laptop and say, do this module, and you don't really interact with them much. We had a lot of students weren't particularly fond of this approach. And then the gamified approach, which, like our little game, there's some kind of score, there's some kind of contest sort of embedded in this to get students a little bit more engaged with it. So a couple surprises that we had. We went into this expecting that computer science teachers were going to be the ones who had the most relevant stuff about cybersecurity and AI ethics. That was not really the case. We found this much more often in civics, history, English, literature, journalism, and this sort of thing. The most likely reason is that, especially in civics, government sort of courses, these teachers have a really rich history of engaging in ethical topics, which is perhaps not necessarily the case for the very technical teachers. So yeah, we found relevant stuff, but not usually with the actual technical courses. The second is that usually this wasn't really planned. It came up sort of spontaneously, these ethical discussions, whether you're reading some story that is, I don't know, by Philip K. Dick, and so then it's just natural that you talk about, I don't know, robots and androids and what's the difference between an android and humanity and so on like this. Then, yeah, this was the other thing that I mentioned earlier is that you can't really talk about current events very long without getting into cybersecurity incidents. So it happens not infrequently, it's just not really planned. It's not really in the curriculum. So a few remaining challenges. I've posted these here. I just wanted to highlight student attitudes. One teacher said, "A lot of my students are really naive. They think that if you get duped by fake news, it's because you're stupid." And this is an attitude that it was not just this teacher, by the way. It was a lot of teachers said something kind of similar to this. This is obviously a little bit problematic when, if you think that only dumb people get phished, for example, then this is a problem because then you yourself are not aware of your own vulnerability, for example. But there was a lot of really interesting discussion about student attitudes, which we really went into in depth with the paper. We also found the failure of cyber hygiene. Again, usually it's about freshman orientation. To the extent that it does exist, as student 10 says, they learn about having a strong password and not sharing it with others. And teacher 4 said a quote that I really like. They say, "The last thing that a high schooler wants is to be told that you can't post this or don't do this with your phone because then it's, okay, boomer, and you're just completely dismissed and you have not reached them. You can't really communicate with them past that point." And also activist parents and hyperpolarization. Again, I would challenge you to talk about fake news without it getting political pretty quickly. And even the big tech companies, the social media companies, have become very much politicized in America nowadays. And I like this quote from T5, who says, "I get parents coming up to me, 'Hey, what are you telling my kid about?' And there's obviously some concern from teachers that you don't want to have a school board meeting and you want to be posted on YouTube for the wrong reasons or just have angry parents emailing you. It's not something they want to deal with. The implications. Experts like you all should be developing more nifty tools, especially if it runs in a browser, doesn't take technical sort of proficiency to use. If it's in a command line, that's awesome, but it's not going to be accessible to 99% of American high schoolers, right? Something needs to be done about cyber hygiene. It is simply not working. We did find that this is one place where students loved technical exercises to kind of play the attacker and the attacked with phishing exercises. It seemed that they got a much better and more nuanced understanding of how these attacks can work and how indeed it's not only the stupid people who get phished, right? There's a lot more to it than that. And we also think that technology agnostic course material would be valuable because technology changes really quickly and you don't want to do this like every semester. A few questions for us. How do we best unite the ethical and the technical? I think this is something we all need to contend with. And also, how can we ensure that the average Americans get this? Most of the students that we spoke to are from elite schools. They have access to advanced placement courses. These are not the type of schools that the average American goes to. And it's obviously going to be very challenging to stay relevant with technological change. All of our interviews were done before ChatGPT completely changed the game in education, for example. So we applied these lessons and made a bunch of labs. You can check them out here. We would love it if you'd check them out. We are in the final finishing up stages of these, and I will take any of your questions now. Thank you so much.
All right, really great talk. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Carolyn from TISPA. Thank you for your wonderful talk. Could you explain a little bit more about your recruitment strategy, if you had any requirements for participants?
So we mostly used snowball sampling. We used social media. We got a lot of our students from a group of women in cyber, or that wasn't the official name, but it was about young women students who are interested in cybersecurity. We basically put it out there, we're interested in these topics, and if you have experiences that are relevant to this, we would love to talk to you. That's essentially how we did it. So yeah, it was certainly not a representative sample, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a great talk. So I was probably the person who said wow after listening to what they did with some pictures of their partners. But after having those discussion with their librarian or teacher, did the school see any change in their students?
The librarian didn't say that they saw a change. I think that it did sort of become normalized that if you're talking about, well, I mean, some level of sex education is going to happen in health class, right? And the school sort of integrated this discussion with the librarian. The librarian was sort of better at connecting with the students. Like, the students would go to the librarian to talk about stuff they didn't feel comfortable talking to other teachers about, right? So I think this was a very particular thing in this school where the librarian is this kind of a person. I don't know if it's like a replicatable sort of strategy. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge now, there are no students who take health class who don't have that talk with the librarian, where the health teacher literally leaves the classroom and they sort of get the nude text, the sexting talk with the librarian. That's been embedded in that school at least.
So sex hygiene and cyber hygiene are going together in the schools?
In a sense, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Let's thank the speaker one more time.